What's up, guys? My name is Lex Veldhuis, and we're back with a little bit of a different Lex Reflects. From now on, we're also going to look at some big hands that are happening on TV, and today we're going to find out how Phil Hellmuth lost $350,000 in just a couple of days. Now, the video starts off very reasonable. We see a 100-200 game over at Hustler Casino Live. Phil Hellmuth has pocket kings, and he's heads up versus Stanley Choi on a queen-high board. Phil did a little bit of slow playing, but no matter how they would have played this hand, they would have gotten a lot of money in, and he ends up losing a 70k pot, flat calling the river.
I have a bad feeling you have me, but I have an overpair.
And this is kind of where it all starts. It's a little bit too bad because Phil kept the pot relatively small. He had a bad feeling in which he was correct.
Come on, this motherfucking goddamn fucking queen.
What's that? What's that?
Ah!
And there we get the
I had a bad
tantrums.
feeling when I joked I was gonna get up, but if a queen doesn't come, I'm gonna beat him for 70,000.
Wait, you're telling me that if the queen doesn't come, your kings beat his queen?
No, I'm telling you, I'm gonna beat him for 70,000. That's what I'm telling you.
Stop.
All right, and we go straight into the next hand. Now, I think one of the biggest problems that Phil almost always says is like, if this would have happened, I would have done that. If this would have happened, I would have won so much. And I think at a certain point, you need to just stop trapping and play your hands fast. Of course, that hand he would have lost regardless. But I think that the coming hands are going to be the real problem. This one is a shocker for me. So we have Alex Keating here, one of the most aggressive, loose, wild players we see on the cash game scene. Absolute legend. Has been making for very fun TV. They're playing 100, 200, 400, so there's going to be a 400 straddle. Super loose game. So we see an open with Jack 10 from Chamath.
A bunch of attempts, no big hits.
Helmuth slow plays ace king here, and this is something that I can get behind. They're playing super deep. He's 300 big blinds deep versus some players. It's absolutely fine, especially in live games where you're not going to get a lot of folds to mix this in. So far, so good. All right, so we see king jack suited on the button call by Friedberg. And as we JR with pocket tens, he makes it 9,000, so that's 22.5 big blinds. And this is where it gets interesting, right? We see Keating close to playing to close to 100% of his hands call with Jack 8 offsuit. Definitely not recommend, but that's the style he was going for. He's super deep. He wants to play massive pots post flop.
And Chamath just mucked Jack 10 of diamonds.
Don't try this at home, but Keating will. All right, so now Hellmuth has a decision to make. This is actually the dream spot, right? If you flat call with ace-king, you're hoping for somebody to raise behind you. Now, what's really good on top of that is that the person that's playing 100% of their hands calls as well. So that means that at a minimum, you have 9,000 dead money in there. You can also say that Friedberg's 1,200 is also dead money because this deep, with an open and a call, you're going to fast play all your hands. It's much different to slow play versus one opener or an opener and a caller. So Friedberg's out of the equation, right? Keating is out of the equation, and he obviously has Jack 8 playing 100% of his hands. And Ace-King, this is very important to realize, Ace-King is already a good hand to fast play here versus JR's squeeze, especially because you're going to underrepresent your hand. You're going to look much more like a hand like Ace-Jack or Ace-10 that's going to put sort of like the re-squeeze on. So this is actually a dream spot for Ace-King, especially with all the dead money picked up, and Ace-King is just a very, very good hand. Now, the downside to the situation, obviously, is that you're 500, I can't count, is that you're 250 big blinds deep versus JR, but you're in position. So that's really good. At some point, you're going to have to play hands fast, especially when you're this deep stacked, you need to grind your edges. So Hellmuth is a really clear 4-bet here. Honestly, I would even be fine. Like, this sounds pretty wild, but I would be pretty fine if he just rips it in here and just picks up the 20k. But I think your hand is strong enough to just put a 4-bet in. This is... it hurts my soul to see it. It hurts my soul to see it. Especially the point. Guys, it's so absurd. This is a spot, the most normal spot in the world, right? Raise, re-raise. A person can have a bunch of different hands, right? There could be ace-10 suited in there, pocket 9s in there. I mean, clearly pocket 10s, anything, right? So if you think you can put the opponent re-raising you on two specific hands, aces and kings, that are blocked by the cards in your hand, you have to be some sort of magician, right? And I know that Phil Hellmuth's all about the white magic, but this just doesn't add up. So The one thing I think when I see this is honestly that I think that he's uncomfortable playing this deep stack, that he didn't really know what to do. And it's sort of like a gamble like, oh, well, they could be strong. Let's stay away from the situation. If this is your feeling, just buy in for 80,000 so you can just put the money in, right? And that's the genuine advice. If you are not willing to play with your stack when you get good hands, you should not be buying in this deep. The rest of the hand doesn't matter. Keating ends up bluffing, which is all well and good. Keating does what Keating does. It's funny too because after this hand, you really see that Hellmuth goes into a little bit of a spiral now after this, which brings us to our next hand. And guys, be on the lookout for Lex Reflects. I'm going to be doing a lot of these segments about big hands that we see on TV, so make sure you sub so you don't miss any of them.
There are some fans at home that are like, oh, wait.
And we see the storm brewing, right? We see him play a little bit faster. Limps King 10 here in the hijack, wouldn't advise it. Hand plays perfectly as a raise. There's nobody in front of you.
The trapping game's a long-term game.
And we see JR here on the button with a very legit hand, makes it 1,000. It's 100, 200 at this moment, so straddle's not there. And Keating in again, of course, especially with 8-5 suited. So it checks the Keating here on the flop. He has a set of queens. He's going to make a continuation bet of about 66%. We see Keating come along the bottom pair. Fine. I think at this point, actually, Hellmuth has a really good hand to continue with. When stacks get this deep and you can play a relatively small pot, where ranges, at least from one person, seem relatively strong, JR in this moment, I think it's pretty good to draw to the absolute omega nuts. And of course, a jack would be great here. You can even make a case that Keating is going to fill a lower straight quite often over future cards. JR, as a preflop raiser, is going to be loving to bet this board and does so. So also the 10 of clubs gives it a little bit of an emergency shot at a flush for Hellmuth in case he needs it. Now this is where we go completely off grid. Turn is a 7. We see Keating check. And we see these little snappy bets. And I remember this from high stakes poker. When Hellmuth starts doing these like little snappy movements and stuff, he's not in a great place, right? He leads 6,000 here. And I think one of the problems with this bet is that he's insanely capped. So let's go over this for a second, right? Because a lot of you guys sometimes ask from these videos what cap means. Hellmuth limp calls before the flop. What does this mean technically, right? He doesn't have aces. He doesn't have queens. He doesn't have eights. He doesn't have ace queen. And he probably doesn't even have ace 8 suited. So what claim can you make to this board? Now, that doesn't mean that you cannot lead the turn. But when do we want to lead turns? When some of the, or at least enough of the equity shifts towards us, where we can now make a claim to this board. However, the 7 doesn't do anything. It doesn't fill out a flush. Hellmuth probably also raises a7, but would probably choose to check with that one. He's not going to get to the turn with pocket 7s. So what are we actually repping here? And this is where I get super murky, because you get in a spot where you know you're not repping anything, and JR pretty much has free reign. He can just raise and tax some hands because he's never going to run into the nuts. Even if JR has a hand like ace-king, he can very comfortably raise here. Ace-jack even, right? He can very comfortably raise on the turn, so you're not protected. You have no idea where you stand, because you're also going to get bluffed very easily because you look weak. So huge problem by leading the turn.
Check, call, lead.
Wants to take active control of the pot. I just think it's the wrong moment to do it.
Time he's leading into middle set.
And
the king 10.
JR obviously loving this, really hoping that he's up against a hand like ace-8 or ace-7 somehow, or a hand like ace-10. Keating gets out. Hellmuth doesn't think at all.
The fuck do you have? Aces and queens?
Puts in the 13k. At this point, I think he's just tilting and trying to hit a jack.
Is he going to represent a club? Well, the river's a 5.
Insta checks the river.
Let's get king high.
Keating and I are going to chug a beer.
What's going on here?
And I mean, even if you look at the situation, right? Like JR is on the button. He is mixing in conversation with his neighbors. Bets 22,000. He bets about half pot, and he's really taxing Hellmuth here. And I think one of the biggest problems here is generally, right, we don't want to bluff with missed flush draws because of the reason that we want our opponent to have missed flush draws, right? If we make missed flush draws available for our opponents, that means we increase the amount of folds that they have. So generally on the river, you don't want to bluff with your higher flush draws. However, in these kind of live games, this is exactly the kind of bluffs that people are going for. So let's look at the qualities of Hellmuth's hand here. So let's say he has the best hand with king high. What does he need his opponent to have, right? Flush draws. I would say that if you're looking to call with king high and you're trying to block flush draws, the 10 of clubs is probably the most important card that you want your opponent to have. Let's think about straight draws, right? let's say they have a hand like Jack 10 or 10-9. Both very possible. You have a 10 in your hand. So again, the 10 is an awful card to call with here on the river. On top of that, it just seems like a way too much sort of like relaxed situation. You're, oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, okay, 22K, yeah, you know. And this is actually where it's a little bit disappointing. And I think that you can see that Hellmuth's side is vacuum, right? Because he prides himself on being a master reader of the game. And I genuinely think that's one of his strengths during his WSOP runs, that he has a really good feel for the field, how they're going to respond to him, and how they're going to respond to being at the WSOP. But here it's like he closes down the walls, he's in his sort of like own echo tilt chamber, and he just makes up reasons to do certain things, and he just thinks, I have king high, if they're bluffing, I might win. But with the 10 of clubs in their hand, I just don't think that there's a big enough chance that they're going to be bluffing.
Mr. Reed.
Mr. Reed.
What a read. Wow.
Gets the bad news, and honestly, it's just, I feel like this spot is just a waste of money, and it's just also such a waste as well. Like, I don't understand how we get to this point, right? So this clearly shows that he wasn't happy with the ace-king fold, which is why I think it had something to do with being too deep in the cash game. Also, that he's steaming a little bit from the kings versus queens, but I think it's very important if you lose a very big hand in a very big setup, but you don't lose a lot of chips. I think that's generally something to be happy with in poker, right? And I know it doesn't always feel that way, but if it's at the start of a session and you're on a super soft table and somebody's playing 100% of their hands, just chill the fuck out, you know? All right, so this brings us to our last hand, and this is the biggest pot of them all. This is the next day at Live at the Bike, and Phil Hellmuth was going to host a couple shows. He invited some people, and this game was going to be Phil Hellmuth's home game or something like that, right? So he calls and emails some people or whatever he does, and he gets some people together to play. Now, it looks like a pretty wild table, and
settle for king queen off.
This is the next day.
Jack and then won like a free 15,000.
All right, so we joined with Hellmuth muttering about a hand before.
Eric Hicks with ace king of diamonds.
Okay, so it's 100, 200s.
That's the type of hand I want to spend my
Shout out to
Valentine's Day night
Dankness in the
with,
commentary.
if my wife is busy, of course.
No commentary.
And Hellmuth has kings.
All right.
And this is going to get spicy.
Hellmuth makes it 2,000. I really like this race. It's very big and loose games. I think it's really good to make like exorbitant raises pre-flop, because you want to thin out the competition, right? You want to play against 1 or 2 people and not have Joe and Sammy in with the 5-8 suited and stuff.
Putting in the cold 3-bet.
All right, and this is, I think,
And there goes
one of the
Eric with
first
ace king of
key moments in this hand. So we have somebody limping under the gun. Think about the sizes as well, because it might not seem like a lot, but because Phil's sizing is so big, everything else gets magnified. We have a limper under the gun. Now, this could mean a lot of things, right? But generally, we all know when a limper under the gun is going to do something. And it usually shows a lot of strength, even from loose players, right? So we have a limper. Hellmuth makes it 10 big blinds. He gets 3-bet by Berkey, and Berkey thinks he's just ISOing. Berkey wants to play a hand that is playable, out of position, has some board coverage, so he's going to mix in some middling suited hands. Fine. So he makes it 5,500. Now, Eric Hicks, who likes to play hands, but still, there's a certain limit to that, right? Even if you like to play a lot of hands, you don't look at 26 big blind 3-bet and think, oh, cool, I have Jack 9 suited, 20K. It just doesn't happen like that. So we can disregard the fact that somebody's quite a loose player when it gets to a situation like that, because ranges get so narrow, right? Just by sizing here, everything gets really squeezed into this narrow range. So 20,000. I mean, you're looking at the stacks. You see Berkey 70K, which is a lot in this game, but it pales in comparison to the 360 that Hicks has in front of him, and then Hellmuth with a 200K. But this 20K limp raise is 100 big blinds. At a regular cash game, this would be a standard all-in. Like, that's how big it is, right? 100 big blinds. Like, you almost never put in 100 big blinds in a tournament. Like, that's how deep this is. So what's really important here, and what I really like that Hellmuth does, is that, so if you roll the tape,
and Phil's got kings.
we see Hellmuth calling here, and I think that's really good.
He just
I think when
calls.
ranges get narrow, I think it's good to play aces a little bit faster, because you can tax queens and jacks and kings more in case it comes with a bad flop. So you can, it's easier to make a lot of money from those hands. Whereas kings, it's better to flat, because if Hellmuth's put in like 60K, then Hicks might fold a hand like jacks. Or, we see some people hero fold queens in some of these deep stack cash games. So I really like the flat with kings because even though ranges get narrow, with kings it's important that you keep it a little bit as wide as possible. I don't think there's a whole lot of bluffs on Nix's side. If you take away hands like ace-5 suited, all of a sudden it's much less scary to take a flop with kings, right? Because ace-5 suited has much less... If it's not in there, it can flop an ace on you, is what I'm trying to say. So you're going to be up against a lot of pairs, which is great with kings. You don't want to push them out. So I really like the flat here.
I don't know.
Wow.
I don't either.
Berkey probably really worried about this
Burke is
under
getting
the
a
gun.
decent price
Limp
to hack
raise
these
has a lot of
guys,
money
but
in.
not super deep. I wonder if he's... Yeah, he's just going to fold. And the big boys are going to go at it. Mad genius versus Hellmuth.
Gets out of the way. So pretty standard situation. Like I said, really like the flat with kings.
And Mad genius flops the nuts. And
All right, so we see Hicks here.
This
Flops
is
the
not going to
nizzles.
end well for him. Mad genius just thinking, how much can I get?
Pretty
from this
unfortunate
guy?
for Hellmuth because obviously, you know, the easiest way to lose his hand is by an ace being on the
That's
flop, which
20.
will immediately slow Hellmuth
Phil's
down.
not going anywhere.
This is a little bit
He's not loving life, honestly. But
out of
he's
his
not
hands,
folding.
especially
Two
on the
kings.
earlier streets. So he calls, which is absolutely fine. Raising would be pretty awful. I don't even think there's going to be
And the
any
turn's
raising
an
at all
8.
because you're going to
Phil's gonna
have
stay
some
around
flats
here.
and you're going to need to protect those with all your strong
Something
hands.
crazy happens. Mad genius is just
8 is a
wondering,
complete brick.
how much can
There's
I
no
get
Queen
from this
Jacks in
guy?
here. In all fairness,
That's like nice and convenient. For
no.
you.
I mean, Hellmuth wasn't even a
Sure,
3-better.
that's
Like,
huge.
50 ball.
don't think Hellmuth's going to have Queen Jack suited here.
Almost opened his law firm down there, but he thought maybe people.
And Hellmuth is just getting chopped down. Like,
All right, so now we see a bigger bet, 50k. I honestly think that I don't think that Hellmuth can fold here.
Eric's been pretty crazy.
One of the biggest problems here, though, is that Hicks is probably not going to have a whole lot of bluffs. I think that the bluffs he's going to contain are going to be ace-king or ace-queen offsuit with a diamond in his hand. I don't think that he has a hand like jacks and things, so I'm just going to fire. If he has a hand like jacks, he's value betting, right? So I think there's enough ace-king still in there and queens and jacks because at this moment you're beating every single combination of queens and jacks, right? Even the ones with a diamond, the ones without a diamond, you're doing fantastic against, and they could still be betting for protection. Like a hand like queens can think, oh, well, I got called before the flop. You know, I'm going to bet for some protection. He could have a bunch of hands or a single diamond or, you know, whatever the case. So I think that the turn call with kings here is pretty mandatory.
Queens, he could just have an ace-king with a
Yeah,
diamond. He could have a lot of hands.
It's actually really, really convenient. It's really fucking
Can't see
cool.
Phil folding the kings here.
The whole thing is just goes next door.
He's going to want to at least see a river in position.
The best
Even
of
though
it.
Phil is wrong dead,
Is that good?
I will be very honest that I think this is a very tough spot for him. Pretty unfortunate.
Phil's in there. He's not going anywhere. And if this river is a
Snappy
brick,
call.
This is the biggest spot I played in a long time.
it's a
Big
big
spot,
pot.
there you
Already
go.
almost
So he
200,000 in there.
the deep stack thing is going through his head.
River's another diamond, and this is going to save Phil. This is the lifeline he needed. He's not going to
agree
be
with
happy.
Will.
He's going to be in mega tilt. He thinks he just got sucked out on. Meanwhile, he just got saved. $156,000 that he probably would have lost if this was... Is Eric looking Eric check, but no, he's just thinking about it.
50,000.
And he bets 50 again, and oh man, he's just trying to milk him. But
All right, so now we have a genuine decision to make, right? The river's a diamond. So what does this mean? There's a few cycles that we want to go through. Are we beating hands that are value betting worse? I think that answer is no. I don't think that on this 4 diamond board, I don't think queens and jacks look at this and think like, oh, yum, yum, I'm going to value bet my hand, right? So are we beating value bets that are worse? No. Okay. So that's one thing that we need to take into consideration when calling. Are there a lot of natural bluffs? Now, I think that if somebody's very experienced in trying to find bluffs, I think that, for instance, they could try and find a hand like queens or jacks, you know, a hand like jacks with without a diamond and think, well, I guess this is my worst hand now because all of my hands with 1 diamond that were bluffing got there. Okay, let's think about high card hands that could be 4-betting pre-flop, right? Let's think about the ace-kings and ace-queens. So I don't think that a hand like ace-king of spades is betting the turn. Sure, they're going to stab the flop, but if you get called on this board, I don't think... Rarely anyone in these games is gonna barrel ace-king of spades on the turn. So we lose kind of those hands, right? So if we look at natural turn bluffs, there's going to be ace-king offsuit and ace-queen offsuit with a diamond in there. If we're looking at hands that were value betting the turn that we were beating, there's going to be queens and jacks with a diamond in there that might value bet now. So it's actually becoming incredibly hard to think of natural bluffs. There's no hands that we're beating that people are happily betting. And we have to think that our range is incredibly narrow, right? And we have quite a few flushes to call with ourselves. We have aces with a diamond. we have normally, right? You have to think about a normal situation. We don't know what our opponent has. So we have ace-king with a diamond. We have aces, kings, queens, and jacks with a diamond. Even 10s and 9s are better calls because they're higher up in the ranking than our pocket kings. So we have plenty of hands that we can normally call with. Now, what I will say is that this bet by Hicks is so small, he ends up betting 50k. His bet is so small that you're going to have to call a lot. But even so, we're also going to have to find folds. And there's very few cards that we get to the river with that are worse than our hand. Of course, we're also going to have queens and jacks without a diamond, right? But that's very few and far between. So I think that kings is in the clear bottom here, and I think we're just going to have to get away from it. We're going to be able to call enough. All the hands that we're beating are beating us now. And I think this is just
oh my God,
a situation that's going to happen. And I think this is where you see a little bit of the wear and tear of these days of playing.
And he calls! Oh my God, he pays it off. The mad genius with the perfect river sizing. Gets a 50 ball out of Hellmuth on the Diamond River. This guy is incredible. And Hellmuth's done! He's done!
If I can't trap the crazy guy with ace-king versus aces.
It's so weird to me to lie about your hand there in the end. Like, you had a really good hand. Why do you have to say you have aces? It's such weird behavior.
I was so mad when I saw that flush. I was dead to one out.
And Berkey would have had a smaller flush.
All right, so a pretty disastrous few days for Hellmuth there. I think that's, I mean, the kings versus queen hand, regardless of how it was played, he did lose the minimum. I think the ace-king hand's legitimately, like I said, one of the worst hands I've ever seen play on TV. The king-10 hand as well is awful. I think the kings versus ace-king is just pretty unlucky. I can see where he's coming from. I don't think he has to pay off the last 50k on the river, but obviously the majority of the pot was just a pure setup. So rough week for Hellmuth there, and even though I'm not the biggest Hellmuth fan, I have to say he's completely in his right to quit the game. He had a few days of recording left, and of course it really sucks for Live at the Bike because they're building a show around him. But when you have a week like that and it's all built around you, I can understand. Of course, the true victim in this whole situation is poor old Kevin Martin. He got invited to one of the softest games in the planet, and the whale in the game decided to quit because he lost 350k. How dare he? And of course, he still could play one of the softest games there was, in which he ended up winning 70k. But oh my God, those travel expenses, yeah, that's a tough one for poor old Kev there. All right, guys, that's it for today's video. I had a lot of fun watching these hands. Of course, huge shout out to Live at the Bike and Hustler Casino Live for letting us use the footage. Check those channels. They have really awesome cash game shows, and they're on very regularly. My name is Lex Veldhuis. I'll see you guys next time. If you like this new segment of Lex Reflects, then make sure you sub and you can leave a comment down below with some thoughts. Peace out.